Right now, somewhere in your body, loneliness is doing something you cannot feel. It is changing your gene expression. It is suppressing your immune system. It is raising your cortisol and keeping it elevated. It is altering the way your brain processes threat. And it is doing all of this quietly, invisibly, in ways that accumulate over months and years into measurable biological damage. Loneliness is not a feeling. Not exactly. It is a physiological state, a biological alarm. And understanding what it actually is, what it does inside you, and why will change the way you understand yourself, your relationships, and the strange epidemic of disconnection spreading through the modern world. Start with the question nobody asks. Why does loneliness hurt? Not metaphorically, physically. When you are isolated, cut off from connection, something in your chest tightens. Something behind your eyes aches. There is a quality to loneliness that resembles physical pain because, as neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA has shown, it activates the same neural circuitry. In a landmark study, Eisenberger and her colleagues used brain imaging to track what happened when people were socially excluded, left out of a game, ignored by others, rejected from a group. The results were unambiguous. The anterior cingulate cortex lit up, the same region that processes physical pain, the same region that fires when you burn your hand or twist your ankle. Social rejection and physical injury are processed in the brain through overlapping systems. This is not an accident of evolution. It is a design feature. Your ancestors did not survive alone. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, survival was a group project. Finding food, defending against predators, raising children, navigating the dangers of a world that could kill you in a dozen ways before breakfast. All of this required other people. Being excluded from the group was not an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Slowly, inevitably, and usually soon. So your brain evolved a warning system, a system to detect social disconnection early before it became fatal, and to motivate you to do something about it. And because the stakes of isolation were so high as the stakes of physical injury, the brain borrowed the same alarm it already had. Pain. Loneliness hurts because for most of your evolutionary history, loneliness killed. But pain is just the signal. The deeper story is what loneliness does to your biology when it persists. John Cacioppo was a neuroscientist and social psychologist at the University of Chicago, who spent his career studying loneliness with more rigor and depth than perhaps anyone before him. What Cacioppo found, across decades of research, was that chronic loneliness produces a cascade of biological effects so pervasive and so damaging that they rival smoking as a risk factor for early death. Let that land. Not that loneliness makes you sad. That loneliness, sustained social isolation, the persistent sense of being disconnected from others, is associated with premature mortality at roughly the same magnitude as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The mechanism begins with a system you know, the stress response. When your brain perceives a threat, it activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, a cascade of hormonal signals that ends with a flood of cortisol into your bloodstream. Cortisol is useful in short bursts. It mobilizes energy. It sharpens attention. It prepares you to respond. But loneliness does not produce short bursts of cortisol. It produces chronically elevated cortisol. A low, persistent flood that never quite turns off. And sustained cortisol elevation is devastating to the body. It suppresses immune function. It promotes inflammation. It disrupts sleep. It accelerates the shrinking of the hippocampus, the brain region central to memory and spatial navigation. It increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and cognitive decline. And it does something else that Cacioppo found particularly striking. It changes how your genes are expressed. In a series of studies using genomic analysis, Cacioppo and his colleagues found that lonely individuals show a distinctive pattern of gene expression they called the conserved transcriptional response to adversity. In lonely people, genes associated with inflammation are upregulated, switched on more strongly. Genes associated with antiviral immunity are downregulated, switched off. The body, in its ancient wisdom, is preparing for the most likely threats in an isolated environment. Without the protection of the group, you are more vulnerable to physical injury and attack. So, inflammation, which helps wounds heal, gets prioritized. But viral infection, which spreads through social contact, becomes less of a threat when you have no social contact. So, antiviral defenses relax. This is genomic loneliness. Your DNA is responding to your social state. The cruel irony is that the biology of loneliness makes connection harder to achieve, not easier. Cacioppo documented this carefully. When you are chronically lonely, your brain shifts into a hypervigilant threat detection mode. You begin to perceive ambiguous social signals as hostile. A neutral face reads as unfriendly. An unanswered message reads as rejection. A pause in conversation reads as disapproval. Your social cognition becomes skewed toward threat, because the lonely brain, shaped by evolution, is trying to protect you from a social environment it has learned to distrust. This is why loneliness is self-reinforcing. It makes you more defensive, more withdrawn, more likely to interpret benign interactions as threatening, which makes genuine connection harder to form, which deepens the loneliness. It is a biological feedback loop with no natural exit. Understanding this changes how you think about lonely people. It is not a character flaw. It is not weakness or introversion or a failure to try hard enough. It is the behavior of a nervous system running an ancient protective program in an environment that program was never designed for. And the environment matters enormously, because while loneliness is ancient, the scale of it is new. Former United States Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, in his 2023 advisory on the loneliness epidemic, reported data that should stop you in your tracks. In the United States, approximately half of adults report measurable levels of loneliness. More than a third report that their social connections lack depth or meaning. Young adults, the most digitally connected generation in history, report the highest rates of loneliness of any age group. Read that again slowly. The most connected generation in human history, connected to more people in more ways than any generation before them, is the loneliest. This tells you something important about the difference between connection and contact. Social media provides contact, notifications, likes, scrolling faces. It activates the same superficial circuits that track social information, but it does not provide what the nervous system actually needs. Eye contact held long enough to feel safe, the sound of a voice in real time, physical proximity, the experience of being fully attended to by another conscious being. What the research consistently shows is that it is not the number of social interactions that predicts well-being. It is the quality. 2 or 3 deeply reciprocal relationships, relationships where you feel known, where your emotional state is genuinely tracked and responded to, are more protective than dozens of shallow contacts. Your brain is not counting followers. It is measuring felt connection, and felt connection requires presence. The philosopher and theologian Martin Buber wrote about this in a different frame. He distinguished between I-it relationships, where the other person is an object, a means, something you use, and I-you relationships, where the other is a full subject, genuinely encountered, genuinely met. Buber argued that the I-you encounter is not just ethically superior. It is where something essential in a human being comes alive. It is where the self is most fully realized. Neuroscience did not exist in Buber's time, but what he was describing maps almost precisely onto what researchers like Cacioppo, Eisenberger, and Murthy have since documented with genomic analysis and brain imaging. The nervous system is not satisfied by the I-IT transaction. It needs the I-you encounter, genuine reciprocal presence, being truly seen. And when it does not get it, when the social environment provides contact without connection, stimulation without presence, information without intimacy, the ancient alarm fires. Cortisol rises, inflammation spreads, genes shift, the brain goes on guard, the body begins to pay the price. There is something almost unbearably poignant about this. Your biology carries within it the memory of what it was built for, a world of small groups, of faces known since birth, of physical proximity sustained over years, of being embedded in a web of relationships so tight that your survival was inseparable from the survival of those around you. That world is gone. Most people in the modern world will never live inside it. But your nervous system has not received that update. It still expects the village, and in its absence, it sounds the alarm it was built to sound. You are not broken if you are lonely. You are not weak. You are not failing at something others have mastered. You are a social animal living in a world that has structured itself in ways that make genuine connection harder and harder to find. You are carrying an ancient need in a modern environment that has not caught up to what that need requires. The research is clear on what helps. Not more contact. Deeper contact. Not more connections, more honest ones. Not fixing your loneliness alone, because loneliness, being a social problem, requires social solutions. But reaching toward one person, in one real moment, with enough presence to let them actually see you. Your brain evolved to do this. It was built for exactly this. The need you feel is not a flaw in your design. It is the design.